My name is Amelia Hayes, and on April 18th, a day that arrived with the scent of rain-washed lilacs and the promise of spring, I learned a profound lesson about the quiet strength it takes to tend to one's own life as carefully as a garden. It began not with a storm, but with a subtle shift in the air, a change in the light. My story, however, doesn't start on that specific Thursday. It starts, as most stories do, much earlier, rooted in the soil of a life I thought I understood. I grew up in a small town tucked into the rolling green hills of Ohio, a place where success was measured not in quarterly earnings, but in the straightness of your fence posts and the generosity of your harvest. My grandfather was a carpenter, a man who believed that the soul of a thing, be it a person or a piece of wood, was revealed in its grain. "You can't force the wood, Amy," he'd tell me, his voice raspy with sawdust and patience. "You have to listen to it. Understand its strength, its weakness. Then, you work with it." That philosophy became my compass. It guided me through college and eventually led me to the historic city of Portsmouth, a beautiful old port city of brick and cobblestone that felt like a bridge between the past and the future. And it led me to the doors of Everwood and Finch, a century-old bespoke furniture company that felt less like a corporation and more like a cathedral dedicated to craftsmanship. For 8 years, I had poured my heart into that company. I started in the workshop, learning the language of oak and maple, the scent of beeswax and linseed oil becoming as familiar to me as my own skin. I rose through the ranks, not by sharp elbows, but by a quiet, steady competence. Eventually, I became the director of Heritage Projects, a division I had conceived of and built myself. My work was to find and reclaim timber from historic buildings set for demolition, weathered beams from an old New England barn, floorboards from a forgotten riverside mill, and give them a new life as heirloom furniture. Each piece had a story, a history etched into its grain. It was my grandfather's philosophy made manifest. The company was led by Arthur Croft, a man who, for most of my tenure, seemed to share this reverence for legacy. He was a third-generation owner, a man with a kind face and eyes that held the weight of his family's history. He appreciated my work, often stopping by my office to admire a new design or to simply run a hand over a piece of reclaimed chestnut, a wistful smile on his face. I respected him. I thought we were caretakers of the same flame. Then, about a year ago, the first sign of blight appeared. Arthur's son, Julian, fresh from an MBA program that seemed to have taught him everything about spreadsheets and nothing about soul, joined the company. He was given the title of Chief Innovation Officer, a vague and imposing name for a role no one had asked for. Julian Croft was not a loud or aggressive man. His danger was quieter, more insidious. He moved through our hallowed halls with the placid, unshakable confidence of someone who has never once had to earn his place. He was handsome in a polished, detached way, his designer suits a stark contrast to the comfortable, lived-in atmosphere of Everwood and Finch. He spoke in a language of synergies, leveraging assets, and optimizing verticals, words that felt alien and abrasive in a place that smelled of wood and history. He saw our craft not as an art, but as an inefficiency. He saw our artisans, men and women who had dedicated their lives to their skill, as sunk costs. And he saw me, I think, as a quaint relic, a sentimental fool clinging to a past he was eager to bulldoze. At first, his presence was just a minor dissonance, a note played slightly out of tune. I did my best to work with him, as my grandfather would have advised. When he drafted a proposal for a partnership with a fast fashion home goods brand, I didn't dismiss it outright. Instead, I gently rewrote it, reframing it to protect our brand's integrity, adding clauses that emphasized quality over quantity. He took the credit without a word of thanks. When he presented a disastrously miscalculated budget for a new marketing campaign, I stayed late, working with our finance head, Eleanor, to discreetly fix the numbers before they reached Arthur. I did it not for Julian, but for Everwood and Finch. I was tending the garden, pulling the occasional weed before it could choke the flowers. I told myself this was a phase, that he would learn, that the spirit of the company would eventually seep into him. I see now that I was naive. I was mistaking silence for peace and a lack of open conflict for harmony. The breaking point arrived on a Tuesday, 2 weeks before that fateful April 18th. Julian called me to his sterile, glass-walled office, a space that looked more like a tech startup than a part of our company. He didn't ask me to sit. "Amelia," he began, tapping a stylus against a tablet. "I've been reviewing the Q3 pipeline. The Heritage Collection, it's a bottleneck." My heart gave a slow, heavy thud. The Heritage Collection was my life's work. It was our most prestigious, most celebrated line. "It's our most profitable line per piece, Julian," I said, keeping my voice even. "And it's the heart of our brand identity." "The margins are sentimental," he countered, a dismissive wave of his hand. "The sourcing is unpredictable. The labor is intensive. It's not scalable. I'm replacing it." I felt the blood drain from my face. Replacing it? With what? He swiped the screen and turned it to face me. It showed a mock-up of sleek, minimalist furniture. It was generic, soulless. It looked like something you'd find in a flat-pack box. "The Synergy line," he said, a flicker of pride in his eyes. "Engineered wood, outsourced manufacturing, streamlined design. We can produce 10 times the volume at a fraction of the cost." I stared at the image, then at him. He didn't understand. He didn't see that he was proposing to tear out the heartwood of the company and replace it with particle board. "Julian," I said, my voice softer now, more pleading than I intended. "This isn't who we are. People come to Everwood and Finch for the story, for the craftsmanship. This will destroy our reputation." "Reputation doesn't show up on a balance sheet," he said coolly. "The board wants to see growth, Amelia. Aggressive growth. And this is the path forward. I've already run the projections by my father. He agrees." He paused, his gaze hardening slightly. "The Heritage Collection is to be sunset at the end of the month. I need you to draw up the plan to liquidate the remaining timber stock and reassign your team." It felt like he'd asked me to burn down a forest. A forest I had planted, tree by tree. I took a deep breath, picturing my grandfather's workshop, the scent of cedar, the steady calm in his hands. "No," I said, the word quiet but firm. "I won't do that." For the first time, a crack appeared in his placid facade. A flash of irritation, of disbelief. "I'm sorry. I cannot, in good conscience, be a part of dismantling the most important thing this company does. I will not sign off on it." His eyes narrowed. He stood up, a subtle gesture of dominance. "You seem to be confused about your role here, Amelia. This isn't a request. It's a directive. If you refuse to carry it out, I will have to inform my father that you are obstructing the company's strategic vision." "You do that," I said, my voice still quiet. I met his gaze, not with anger, but with a profound and sudden clarity. This was a boundary. My boundary. He knows where to find me. I turned and walked out of his office, my legs feeling strangely steady. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew I had chosen my ground. I had listened to the grain of my own being, and I would not be forced against it. The garden of my life was my own, and I would not allow anyone, not even the heir to the estate, to sow it with poison. Walking back to my office, the familiar scent of wood and wax felt different, sharper, more precious. It was the scent of something I was now fighting for. I sat at my desk, my hands resting on the solid oak surface, and for a long moment, I just breathed. The confrontation with Julian hadn't left me shaken, as I'd expected. It had left me centered. For months, I had been accommodating, bending, trying to smooth over the cracks he was creating. In one quiet, simple no, I had finally stood still. I knew his threat wasn't idle. Arthur loved his son, and that love, I was beginning to fear, had become a blindfold. I couldn't count on him to see reason. If I was going to protect the Heritage Collection, and by extension, the soul of the company, I couldn't do it by hoping for the best. Hope is a beautiful thing, but it's a poor strategy. My grandfather also used to say, measure twice, cut once. It was time to start measuring. For the past few months, a small, persistent voice in the back of my mind had urged me to keep records. It started when Julian first began to interfere. I'd created a private folder on my computer, a digital journal of sorts. It wasn't born of malice or a desire for revenge, but from a simple, instinctual need for preservation. Like pressing flowers in a book, I was preserving moments of truth. I had saved his emails, the ones with dismissive, jargon-filled directives that ignored the advice of seasoned department heads. I had documented the instances where his innovations had nearly cost us dearly. The time he changed a varnish supplier to a cheaper, untested alternative, which resulted in a recall of an entire batch of chairs. A cost I'd managed to bury in my department's budget to shield the artisans from blame. I had kept notes from meetings where his proposals were so fundamentally at odds with our brand that they made my stomach clench. Now, I looked at this collection of data not as a weapon, but as a story. It was the story of a company slowly being steered off course by a captain who didn't understand the stars. But a story is useless without an audience. I couldn't go to Arthur. I needed allies, people who spoke the same language of integrity. My first thought was Eleanor Vance, our head of finance. Eleanor was in her late 60s, a formidable woman with a mind like a steel trap and a deep, abiding love for the company she had served for 40 years. She saw the numbers not just as figures, but as the company's vital signs. I found her in her office, surrounded by ledgers that seemed to predate the computer age. I closed the door behind me. "Eleanor," I began, "I need to speak with you, off the record." She took off her reading glasses and studied my face, her expression unreadable. "I've been waiting for you to come to me, Amelia. It's about the boy, isn't it?" A wave of relief washed over me. I wasn't alone. I sat down and told her everything, ending with Julian's demand to dismantle the Heritage Collection. She listened without interruption, her hands folded on her desk. When I finished, she let out a long, slow sigh. "He sees this place as a piggy bank to be broken open," she said, her voice laced with a weary sadness. "He doesn't understand that the value is in the pig, not just the pennies inside. Arthur is letting his hope for his son cloud his judgment." She looked at me directly. "What do you have?" I showed her my folder. She scrolled through it, her brow furrowed in concentration. She paused on the financial analysis I had done on Julian's proposed synergy line. I had projected the long-term brand damage, the loss of our high-end clientele, the inevitable decline in quality. "My projections are conservative," I said. "They're accurate," she corrected me. "I've run similar numbers myself. This path he's on, it leads to a cliff." She tapped a finger on her desk. "This is good, Amelia. But it's your word and my numbers against the owner's son. We need more." "What do we need?" "We need someone who understands risk not just in dollars, but in legal terms." Her gaze was pointed. "We need Samuel." Samuel Reed was our in-house counsel. He was younger than us, a sharp, meticulous lawyer who believed in the letter of the law, but also possessed a strong moral compass. I had always found him to be fair and deeply principled. He was one of the few people Julian hadn't been able to intimidate. The next day, the three of us met in a small, unused conference room on the top floor. The air was thick with a nervous energy, but also a sense of shared purpose. I laid out the situation again. Samuel listened, his face impassive, occasionally jotting a note on a legal pad. When I was done, he leaned back in his chair. "What Julian is proposing isn't just a bad business decision," he said, his voice precise. "It's a potential breach of fiduciary duty on Arthur's part if he knowingly allows his son to pursue a strategy that demonstrably harms the long-term value and reputation of the company for short-term gain." Eleanor nodded. "That's the legal term for it. I just call it foolishness." "And his attempts to override established quality control protocols," Samuel continued, tapping his pen. "His interference with your department, ordering you to take an action that would violate the core tenets of your role. It constitutes a hostile and unsustainable work environment. It's a pattern of reckless behavior." We spent the next hour mapping out a plan. It wasn't a plot for a coup, it was a strategy for preservation. Eleanor would prepare a confidential financial report for the board, outlining the catastrophic risk of Julian's proposed direction. Samuel would draft a memo detailing the potential legal and governance liabilities. And I would continue to document everything, creating a clear, factual timeline. We were building a seawall, stone by stone, against the coming tide. The final piece of the puzzle fell into place unexpectedly. A few days later, I had a scheduled lunch with Isabelle Dubois, the head of procurement for the Serafina Hotel Group, our largest and most prestigious client. They were a luxury boutique hotel chain that furnished their suites exclusively with pieces from our heritage collection. Our relationship was built on a shared passion for authenticity and timeless design. Over salads at a quiet restaurant overlooking the river, Isabel gave me a searching look. "Amelia, I'm hearing some whispers. Rumors of a new direction at Everwood and Finch. A more contemporary focus." I chose my words carefully. "We are always exploring new ideas, Isabel." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Let me be direct. We love your work. We love the story. The soul you put into each piece is why we are your clients. It's what our guests value. If that story changes, if Everwood and Finch starts to sound like every other mass-market brand," she let the sentence hang in the air, the implication as clear as the water in her glass. "Our partnership is with the company I see in you, Amelia. If that company disappears, then we will have to reconsider our future." I felt a chill run down my spine, but it was coupled with a sense of validation. This was the proof. This was what Julian and, perhaps, even Arthur couldn't see. Our soul was our balance sheet. I left that lunch with a heavy heart but a clear mind. The lines were drawn. The stakes were higher than I had ever imagined. This was no longer just about my job or my project. It was about the survival of Everwood and Finch itself. And I, Eleanor, and Samuel were now its unlikely, unofficial guardians. We weren't plotting a rebellion. We were preparing for a reckoning. The days that followed felt like the calm before a storm. The air in the office was thick with unspoken tension. I saw Julian in the hallways, and he'd give me a look of cool, confident dismissal, as if I were a minor annoyance he had already forgotten. I continued my work, focusing on my team, on the beautiful, storied wood that filled our workshop. I found solace in the familiar rhythms, the scent of sawdust, the focused expressions of the artisans as they worked. It was a reminder of what was real, what was worth fighting for. Then came the morning of Thursday, April 18th. The day began with a soft, cleansing rain that left the city glistening. I arrived at my office early, holding a warm mug of tea, and found a formal summons on my desk. "Mr. Arthur Croft requests your presence in his office at 9 a.m. My heart didn't pound. It settled into a slow, steady beat. The time for measuring was over. Arthur's office was on the top floor, a grand room with panoramic views of the Portsmouth skyline. It was filled with some of the finest examples of Everwood and Finch's history, a museum of our legacy. He was standing by the window, his back to me, looking out at the rain-swept city below. He looked smaller than I remembered, his shoulders slumped. "Amelia," he said, without turning around. "Thank you for coming." "Arthur," I replied, my voice calm. He finally turned to face me. The kindness in his eyes was still there, but it was clouded by a deep, weary pain. He looked like a man trapped between two impossible choices. "Julian tells me you've refused to cooperate with the new strategic direction," he began, his voice heavy. "I refuse to dismantle the Heritage Collection, yes." He sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "Amelia, you have to understand. The market is changing. We need to be more agile, more modern. Julian has ideas, energy. He has projections," I countered gently. "But he doesn't have understanding. He doesn't understand what makes this company special. He wants to trade our soul for velocity." Arthur flinched at the word soul. It was a word we both understood. "His methods may be abrasive," he conceded. "But his intentions are to secure the future of this company. For all of us. And for his own future." There it was. The heart of the matter. It wasn't just about the company. It was about his son's inheritance, his legacy. "I am trying to secure the company's future too, Arthur," I said. "By protecting its foundation." He shook his head, a look of profound regret on his face. "I can't have this conflict. I can't have my senior leadership at war with my own son. It's tearing the company apart." He walked to his desk and sat down heavily. He wouldn't meet my eyes. "Amelia, I'm going to have to ask you to take a leave of absence. A paid leave, of course. Just for a while. To let things cool down. To give Julian the space he needs to implement his vision. A leave of absence." It was a suspension, wrapped in velvet. A gentle, corporate execution. He was choosing his son. I had known it was a possibility, but hearing the words spoken aloud still landed like a physical blow. But with the pain came a strange, quiet liberation. He had made his choice. Now I could make mine. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I didn't show him the folder on my computer. That wasn't my role. My role was to stand in my own truth. I understand, I said, and the simple dignity in my own voice surprised me. I looked at this man I had respected for so long, and I felt not anger, but a deep and abiding pity. He was sacrificing his most loyal soldier to appease a prince who would burn the kingdom down. I'm sorry, Amelia. Truly, he whispered, his eyes fixed on his desk blotter. I hope you'll understand one day. Oh, I understand today, Arthur, I said softly. I stood up. Thank you for your time. I walked out of his office with my head held high. The journey down the elevator felt like a slow descent into a new reality. I wasn't an employee of Everwood and Finch anymore. I was just Amelia Hayes. And for the first time, that felt like enough. But what Arthur Croft didn't know was that as he was speaking those words to me, a different kind of conversation was beginning. At precisely 9:05 a.m., an email was delivered to the private inboxes of the 6 members of the board of directors. It contained 2 attachments. One was a confidential financial analysis from Eleanor Vance. The other was a legal memorandum from Samuel Reed. My part in the plan was finished. I had tended my garden. I had stood my ground. Now, all I could do was wait for the storm to break. The walk from Arthur's office back to my own was the longest of my life. Every face I passed seemed to be looking at me with a mixture of pity and curiosity. The news would travel fast. By the time I reached my desk, my phone was buzzing with a text from Eleanor. It's done. The reports have been sent. I sat down, the silence of my office feeling vast and profound. I looked at the sketches for a new trestle table, the small block of reclaimed cypress on my desk that I kept for its scent, the photo of my grandfather in his workshop. I wasn't sad. I wasn't angry. I felt a sense of serene emptiness, the kind that comes after a great effort. I had done all I could. An hour later, another text from Eleanor. Board has called an emergency session. 11 a.m. Arthur and Julian have been summoned. I pictured the scene. The long, polished mahogany table in the boardroom, the grim-faced directors, men and women who were investors, yes, but some of whom also had deep, personal ties to the company's history. I imagined Arthur's shock, his dawning realization that this was not about a disgruntled employee, but a systemic crisis. I imagined Julian, blustering, trying to defend his synergy line, his arguments sounding hollow and juvenile in the face of Eleanor's cold, hard numbers and Samuel's precise legal warnings. Around noon, Samuel called me. His voice was low and steady. Amelia, they're reading your documentation now. Eleanor and I are presenting it as supporting evidence. The mood in here is grave. How is Arthur? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He looks like he's seen a ghost, Samuel said. Julian tried to claim you fabricated everything out of spite. It didn't land well. Eleanor has the receipts for every near disaster he caused. It's all there in black and white. I closed my eyes. This wasn't a victory. It was a tragedy. A story of a father's love becoming a fatal flaw. The afternoon bled away in a haze of uncertainty. I packed a small box with my personal belongings, the photo, the block of wood, a few favorite books. I wrote a heartfelt email to my team, telling them what an honor it had been to work with them, urging them to continue their beautiful work. I didn't mention Julian or Arthur. I just spoke of the wood, of the craft, of the legacy we shared. At 4 p.m., my desk phone rang. It was Arthur's private line. I hesitated, then answered. Amelia, his voice was strained, broken. It was the voice of a man who had been shattered. The board, they want to speak with you. Tomorrow morning. My leave of absence has been rather short, I said, not with sarcasm, but with a quiet weariness. He let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. There is no leave of absence. Please, Amelia. Just come tomorrow. The next morning, I walked into the boardroom. The same room Arthur had stood in yesterday, defending his son. The 6 directors were there, along with Eleanor and Samuel. Arthur and Julian were gone. The chairman, a stern but fair man named Thomas Sterling, gestured for me to sit. They didn't interrogate me. They didn't question my motives. They asked me questions. They asked for my perspective on the company's future. They asked me to walk them through the philosophy of the Heritage Collection. They asked me what I thought it would take to heal the damage that had been done. I spoke from the heart. I didn't talk about Julian's failings or Arthur's weakness. I talked about Everwood and Finch. I talked about the importance of story, of authenticity. I talked about honoring the past while building a sustainable future. I used my grandfather's words. I told them you can't force the wood, you have to work with it. When I finished, there was a long silence in the room. Then, Thomas Sterling leaned forward. The board has accepted Arthur Croft's resignation, effective immediately. Julian Croft has been dismissed. We have a crisis of leadership, Amelia. And a crisis of faith in what this company stands for. He paused, his eyes meeting mine. We would like you to step in as interim chief executive officer. The words hung in the air, seeming to belong to someone else's life. CEO. Me. The girl from Ohio who loved the smell of sawdust. I looked at Eleanor, who gave me a small, encouraging nod. I looked at Samuel, who smiled faintly. I found my voice. I am honored, I said, the words feeling inadequate. But I will only accept on certain conditions. The board exchanged glances. Go on, Sterling said. First, a renewed, ironclad commitment to the Heritage Collection and the artisans who make it possible. Second, the establishment of a new charter of ethics and governance to ensure that nepotism can never again threaten the integrity of this company. And third, full authority to lead this company back to what it's supposed to be, without interference. Thomas Sterling didn't hesitate. He extended his hand across the table. Agreed, Ms. Hayes. Welcome aboard. I shook his hand, the grip firm and decisive. It wasn't a moment of triumph. It was a moment of profound, terrifying responsibility. I had set out only to protect a small corner of the garden. Now I had been handed the keys to the entire estate. 2 months have passed since that day. The spring rains have given way to the warm, gentle sun of early summer. The changes at Everwood and Finch have been quiet, but deep, like the turning of soil to let it breathe again. The official announcement was brief and professional. Arthur Croft had retired to focus on his family and philanthropic interests. Julian Croft had left to pursue other opportunities. The corporate world has a language for such things, a polite drapery to cover messy truths. I did not feel the need to pull it aside. My first act as interim CEO was to walk down to the workshop. The artisans, my former team, looked at me with a mixture of apprehension and hope. I didn't give them a speech. I just gathered them around a half-finished table made from 200-year-old oak. This, I said, running my hand over the wood, is who we are. This is our heart. This is our future. My only promise to you is that we will never, ever lose sight of that again. The relief in that room was a palpable thing, a collective exhale that seemed to shake the dust from the rafters. The Heritage Collection wasn't just saved, it was celebrated. We are now working on our largest commission ever for the Serafina Hotel Group. Isabelle Dubois, upon hearing the news of my appointment, had called me personally. The story is safe, she'd said. And so is our partnership. There was no victory party, no gloating. The fall of the Croft family was a quiet, somber affair. I heard that Julian moved to the West Coast, attempting to launch a tech venture funded by what remained of his trust. I wish him no ill will. He is simply a man who was given a map he couldn't read. The most difficult moment came a few weeks ago. A package arrived at my office. It was a small, flat box. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a beautiful, handcrafted dovetail joint, the kind used to join two pieces of wood with strength and elegance. It was made of walnut and maple, the light and dark woods fitting together perfectly. With it was a short, handwritten note on Arthur Croft's personal stationery. It said only, "You are right about the wood. It has to be honored." Thank you. I have kept that joint on my desk, next to my grandfather's picture. It is not a trophy. It is a reminder. A reminder that strength isn't about being unbending, but about knowing what your true grain is and staying faithful to it. It's a reminder that true leadership isn't about power or control, but about stewardship, the gentle, patient, and sometimes painful work of tending to things so they can grow. Sometimes, late in the evening, I stand at the window of what used to be Arthur's office and look out at the city lights. I don't feel like a CEO. I feel like a gardener. My work is to ensure the soil is rich, the roots are deep, and that everything has the light it needs to flourish. It is slow, quiet, methodical work. And I have learned that it is the most important work there is. I am Amelia Hayes. And my story is still being written one day, one piece of honest work at a time.